All right, welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. We've got a really fun one today. We are taking all the pickleball stuff you sent over, all your notes and articles and videos, and we're basically going to distill it down to the absolute most impactful stuff you can actually use on the court. So think of this as your pickleball cheat sheet.
Yeah, and for you, our listener, we know you want to get good fast, right? Like you appreciate different points of view. You're not afraid to dig into the details, and you definitely love those light bulb moments when something finally clicks. But you also don't want to be drowning in information. So this deep dive is going to be super focused and action oriented.
Totally. We're going to be breaking down the core structure of how to think about pickleball, how to stop giving away points with those silly unforced errors, smart strategies for both when you're receiving and receiving, and even a kind of mathematical way to think about those crazy volleys up at the net.
Sounds like a plan. So where should we start?
Let's jump right in. What's the first big thing that stood out to you from all this stuff I sent over?
Honestly, one of the biggest things was just how much emphasis was placed on the return of serve. It might sound counterintuitive, but the data in your sources really suggests that the return side is actually more crucial than the serve side, at least initially.
Hold on, more important than the serve. You don't hear that very often. Most people are obsessed with mastering their serve.
Yeah, I know it seems strange, but hear me out. The key here is to shift your focus from winning the point to not losing the point, especially early in the game. And statistically speaking, your return of serve is way more critical for not losing the game than your serve is.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I'm not quite following. How does missing a return hurt you more than missing a serve? They both give the other team a point, right?
True, but there's a big difference in the number of chances you get. Think about it. You can miss 5 serves in a row and the game keeps going. You're only scoring on your serve. But you only get 10 opportunities to return serve each game before you lose.
Oh, wow. 10 missed returns, and that's it. Game over.
Yeah.
Suddenly, every return feels a lot more important.
Exactly. The sources are all about emphasizing that consistency and depth on the return are your first line of defense. If you can just keep those returns in play, ideally deep, you're immediately denying your opponents those easy points and forcing them to work harder for every single point.
That makes a lot of sense. Don't hand them the win. Make them earn it. So consistent, deep returns. Got it. What else was in there that we should be thinking about?
Well, the other thing that kept coming up was the idea of unforced errors, which, as you know, can absolutely kill you in pickleball.
Tell me about it. My backhand volley sometimes has a mind of its own.
Well, one of the sources put it this way, and I thought it was pretty brilliant. They said, pickleball is not about winning the game, it's about not losing the game.
That's kind of deep. But I guess it's true. You can play a pretty solid game and still lose if you keep giving away points.
Exactly. So the real key to reducing unforced errors is to be super specific about what kind of errors you're making. So instead of just being I missed that volley, it's about asking yourself, was that a forehand volley or a backhand volley? Was I at the net or was I further back? Was I moving or was I standing still?
So it's about really dissecting your mistakes.
Exactly. You have to become a detective for your own game. Figure out the root cause of those errors.
I like it, pickleball detective. Okay, so let's say I've identified my weakness. I'm terrible at, let's say, backhand volleys when I'm moving to my left. What's the next step?
Well, one of the biggest things your sources talked about was this idea of margin for error. It basically comes down to the fact that most players play too close to the lines and too close to the net. And the solution is to be much more deliberate about aiming for safe targets. Give yourself a cushion.
Give yourself some breathing room. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how much margin are we talking about?
Well, your sources were actually pretty specific about this. So for serves and returns, they recommend aiming for about 3 feet of clearance over the net. For dinks, that margin can be 4 to 8 inches, increasing as you get further back from the NVZ. And then for those punch volleys, aim for a good 18 inches over.
3 feet over on a serve, that seems like a lot of air.
It might seem like it, but trust me, that extra height will make your shots way more consistent. Remember, it's the depth of your serve that makes it tough to return, not just how low it is.
Okay, good point. So higher and deeper. Got it. Any other tips on how to actually put this margin for error into practice?
Yeah, a lot of the sources talked about this idea of intentionality. Basically, you want to consciously think about 3 parts of every single shot: your contact point, your net clearance, and your final target. So you're not just randomly hitting the ball, you're playing with a clear purpose.
Contact, clearance, target. I like it. It's like a little mental checklist for every shot.
Exactly. And speaking of specific errors, one that came up a lot was positional errors on the return of serve.
Oh, yeah. What do people usually do wrong there?
Well, a lot of players stand right on the baseline, which can make it really hard to react and hit a good return.
Hmm.
Your sources recommend starting about 3 feet behind the baseline. That gives you a little more time to set up and swing. And then, of course, the goal is still that same consistent, deep return targeted towards the center line, landing about 4 feet from their baseline with that 3-foot net clearance. It immediately puts the pressure back on the serving team.
Okay, so give yourself some space, give the ball some air, and aim deep down the middle.
Got it. Now, the outline you sent mentioned something called the FOSS approach. What is that all about?
So the FOSS approach is basically a strategic framework for thinking about pickleball. It stands for Framework, Objectives, Strategies, and Shots. And the core idea is to think big picture before you even think about specific shots.
Okay, so understanding the situation comes before choosing a shot.
Right. You need to know what your starting advantage or disadvantage is, and that will dictate your objectives, which will then inform your strategies, and finally, your choice of shots. So it's like a top-down way of thinking about the game. You start the big picture and then work your way down to the specifics.
Exactly. And your sources use this FOSS approach to look at both the return and serve sides. So on the return side, your framework is that you're starting with a positional advantage, right? You already have one player up at the non-volley zone line. So your objective is to take and maintain that advantage.
So capitalize on that head start.
Right. And your strategy to do that is to get your partner up to the NVZ line as quickly as possible. And the key shot that enables all of this is that consistent deep return of serve that we keep talking about.
It all comes back to that return.
It really does.
Okay.
Now, on the serve side, the framework is that you're actually starting with a positional disadvantage because of the double bounce rule. So your primary objective becomes overcoming that disadvantage and getting both players up to the NVZ line. And your strategies to do that will often involve hitting shots, like a third shot drop, that give you time to move forward.
So it's like you're playing catch up from the very beginning on the serve side.
Pretty much, yeah. And of course, the first shot, your serve, also needs to be deep to give you that time.
Fascinating. It's amazing how that initial positional setup influences the entire game.
It really does. And your sources also briefly touch on the 3 essential pillars of pickleball improvement, which are the mechanical, strategic, and athletic aspects. So the mechanical is obviously your technique, how you physically hit the ball. The strategic is all about game sense, like what you should be doing and when. And then the athletic is your physical conditioning and mental toughness. And the key is that you can't really excel by just focusing on one of these. They all need to be developed together.
That's a great point. It's a holistic approach, right? You can't just be a great shot maker. You also need to be smart and fit.
Absolutely. And speaking of strategy, one of the most interesting things I came across in your sources was this idea that playing the serve side and the return side are almost like playing 2 different sports.
2 different sports. That's a pretty bold statement. But I guess when you think about the different objectives, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, they really emphasize that the mindset and the skills required are quite distinct. So when you're on the return side, as we've been discussing, your main goal is to grab that initial positional advantage by getting to the NVZ line before the 4th shot. And then once you're there, it's all about holding that line and preventing the serving team from getting up to the net.
And on the serve side, it's all about battling uphill to neutralize that initial disadvantage.
Exactly. The number one goal on the serve side is to transition effectively to the NVZ line. And the data in your sources is pretty compelling here. Once the serving team manages to get to the NVZ line in a neutral rally, their win percentage goes way up from like 25% to almost 60%.
Wow, that's a huge difference. So getting to the net as the serving team is basically like flipping a switch. It completely changes the odds in your favor.
It really does. And speaking of getting to the net, your sources also talked about this strategy called Respect the X. Have you heard of that?
I've heard people say it on the court, but honestly, I'm not totally sure what it means.
So Respect the X is basically a guideline for court coverage, especially during the 3rd shot. The X is like an imaginary diagonal line connecting you and your partner with your opponents. And the general principle is that the player on the opposite end of the X from you is usually the best person to take the 3rd shot.
So you stay on your side of the court, basically.
Right. It's all about efficiency and covering the most likely angles. For example, if their return of serve goes deep to your partner on the left and you're on the right, the X says that your partner should probably take that 3rd shot. A lot of times people are tempted to cross over, especially if the return is kind of in the middle, but that can create confusion and leave gaps in your coverage.
So sticking to the X keeps things simple and organized.
Cool.
Why is breaking the X usually a bad idea?
Well, for a few reasons. First of all, reaching across your body is often less stable and can lead to weaker shots or errors. It can also open up a big part of the court for your opponents to attack. And if you cross over, you might actually get in your partner's way as they're trying to move forward to the NVZ line.
So it's all about maintaining good positioning and not creating any unnecessary vulnerabilities. But I'm guessing there are times when it actually makes sense to break the X.
You're right. Your sources gave a specific example of when it's okay to break the X, and that's when the return of serve is short and lands near the center line. In that case, the player who's not on the X might have a much better angle to attack that short ball aggressively.
I see. So sometimes you have to improvise a little bit.
Yeah. But even when you break the X, there are still some guidelines. Ideally, that attack shot should be aimed right at the returner, forcing them to stay back. That gives your partner more time to get up to the net.
Got it. It's all about taking advantage of the situation.
Yeah.
So respect the X is a good rule of thumb, but there are always exceptions.
Exactly. Now, the last strategic concept your sources talked about was the banger decision tree. This is a really interesting one.
Banger decision tree. That sounds kind of intense.
Well, it is. But it's basically an attempt to bring a more data-driven approach to those really fast-paced exchanges, especially when you're dealing with hard-hit drives, or bangers, as they call them.
So it's like trying to make smart decisions even when the ball is flying at you.
Exactly. And the basic idea is to quickly weigh the potential outcomes of hitting the ball versus just letting it go.
It's like a split-second risk-reward calculation.
Exactly. So your sources give some hypothetical probabilities to illustrate this. Let's say someone hits a hard drive at you from the baseline. If you decide to avoid the shot, maybe there's an 80% chance the ball lands in and a 20% chance it goes out. But if you decide to hit it, maybe there's a 15% chance you make an error, a 15% chance you hit a winner, a 60% chance you just reset the rally, and a 10% chance you pop it up.
So you're comparing the odds of the ball going out if you don't hit it to the odds of the different things that could happen if you do hit it.
Right. And in this case, the math suggests you should probably try to hit the ball because the combined odds of a positive or neutral outcome are higher than the odds of the ball going out.
I'm starting to see how this could be helpful. But what about if that hard-hit drive is coming from somewhere else on the court? Like, let's say from that mid-court area, that no man's land zone.
Yeah, that changes things. So for a drive from no man's land, maybe there's only a 25% chance the ball lands in and a 75% chance it goes out. But if you try to hit it, maybe there's a 25% chance of an error, a 10% chance of a winner, a 25% chance of a reset, and a much higher, like 40% chance of popping it up. So in this case, it's probably smarter to let the ball go because there's a good chance it'll go out anyway, and hitting it is pretty risky.
Wow, so where the ball is coming from totally changes the calculation.
It really does. And the important thing to remember here is that these are just examples. The actual probabilities will vary depending on your opponent and your own skill level. The key is to develop your own sense of those probabilities based on your experience.
It's about being a student of the game, really understanding your opponents and your own tendencies. This is such a cool way to think about those fast-paced volleys.
It definitely adds a layer of strategic thinking to what can often feel like a purely reactive situation.
Well, we've covered so much today. My brain is officially full of pickleball knowledge.
Me too. So for you, our learner, we've talked about the critical role of the return of serve, the importance of reducing unforced errors by being intentional and giving yourself margin for error, the FOSS framework for strategic decision-making, the differences between playing the serve side and the return side, the respect the X strategy, and even that mathematical approach to those hard-hit drives with the banger decision tree.
That's a lot to digest, but what are some specific things our listeners can take away and start working on right now?
Well, the first thing I would say is really focus